The wedding ceremony was supposed to last 7 days. Each day had different rituals and celebrations. Daniel learned this from his protocol guide, a young Volante named Sereth, who had been assigned to help him. Sereth was different from the other Volante Daniel had met. He was younger, less formal, and seemed genuinely curious about humans. His skin shifted between soft blues and greens, which Sereth explained meant he was calm and happy. "You are the first human I have ever met," Sereth told Daniel on the morning of the first ceremony. "Your species is very new to the galaxy. Many people here do not know what to expect from you." "I do not know what to expect from myself," Daniel admitted. "I am not supposed to be here. There was a mistake with the invitation." Sereth tilted his head in a way that Daniel was learning meant confusion. The Volante invitation system does not make mistakes. If you received the invitation, it was meant for you. Daniel did not argue, but he did not believe it either. The first ceremony was held in a great hall bigger than any stadium on Earth. Thousands of guests filled the seats, arranged by species and importance. Daniel was placed near the back, far from the royal family and the important delegates. He did not mind. He preferred to watch and learn that the ceremony was beautiful and strange. There was music that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Dancers moved through the air, held up by invisible forces. The Crown Prince, Kaelin Vethari, stood on a raised platform with his future bride, a Volante princess from a distant world. They were both tall and elegant, their scales glowing with royal colors. Daniel watched everything with wide eyes. He tried to remember all the details so he could write about them later. Maybe his report would be useful to someone back on Earth. The second day passed in much the same way. There was another ceremony, more rituals, and a feast that lasted for hours. Daniel ate strange foods that tasted better than he expected. He made polite conversation with delegates who looked at him like he was a zoo animal. He smiled and nodded and tried not to make any mistakes. On the third day, everything changed. The reigning monarch, King Veleth Tholari, made his first public appearance. Daniel had seen pictures of the king in his study materials, but pictures did not do justice to the real thing. The king was old, nearly 800 years according to Volante records, but he moved with the grace of a much younger being. His scales were deep purple and silver, the marks of the royal bloodline. His eyes were gold, bright and sharp like stars. When the king entered the great hall, every being present fell silent. Everyone bowed low, including Daniel. Everyone bowed low, including Daniel. The room stayed frozen until the king took his seat on a throne that floated above the floor. Daniel raised his head slowly, expecting the ceremony to continue. But then he felt something strange. A pressure, like someone was watching him. He looked toward the throne and found the king staring directly at him. Their eyes met across the vast hall. The king's golden gaze seemed to pierce through Daniel, looking at something beyond his skin and bones. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Daniel could not move, could not breathe. Then the king looked away, and everything went back to normal. Daniel spent the rest of the ceremony trying to understand what had happened. Why had the king looked at him? There were thousands of more important guests in the hall. Daniel was nobody. That night, after the feast ended, a palace guard came to Daniel's room. The guard was tall and serious, dressed in armor that shimmered with inner light. "The king requests your presence in the royal gardens," the guard said. "You will come now." It was not a question. Daniel understood that refusing was not an option. He followed the guard through the palace, his heart beating fast in his chest. What could the king possibly want with him? The royal gardens were empty, except for the king himself. Veleth stood beneath a tree that grew crystals instead of leaves. The crystals caught the moonlight and scattered it in rainbow patterns across the ground. It was beautiful, but Daniel was too nervous to enjoy it. "You are the human," the king said without turning around. His voice was deep and musical, like a cello playing a slow song. "Yes, your majesty," Daniel replied. He remembered to bow. "Come closer. I wish to see you properly." Daniel walked forward until he stood only a few feet from the king. Up close, Velith was even more impressive. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. Daniel felt small and fragile in comparison. The king turned and studied Daniel with those golden eyes. "Your species is young. Barely 100 years since you learned to leave your world. Before that, you spent most of your history fighting yourselves." "That is true," Daniel said. He saw no point in lying. "And yet here you are, standing in my garden, speaking with me as an equal." The king began to walk in a slow circle around Daniel. "Do you know why I summoned you here?" "No, your majesty, because you interest me." The king stopped in front of Daniel again. "I have watched many species rise and fall over my long life. Most of them are predictable. They follow patterns that I can read like a book. But humans are different. You are chaos made flesh. You destroy and create with equal passion. You hate and love with the same breath. You are, perhaps, the most confusing species I have ever encountered." Daniel did not know how to respond to that. He stayed silent. "I saw you in the Great Hall today," the king continued. "You were not afraid. Every other delegate trembles in my presence. They calculate their words, weigh their gestures, fear my judgment. But you looked at me with nothing but honest curiosity." The king smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. "It has been a very long time since someone looked at me that way. I meant no disrespect, your majesty." There was none taken. It was refreshing. The king gestured toward a bench made of living stone. "Sit with me, Daniel Carter. Tell me about your world." So Daniel sat and he talked. He told the king about Earth, about its oceans and mountains and cities. He talked about human history, both the good and the bad. He talked about art and music and stories. The king listened to everything with quiet attention. Hours passed. The moons moved across the sky. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the horizon, the king stood. "You are remarkable," Velith said. "Not because you are special by your own standards, but because you are honest. You hide nothing. You pretend nothing. It is a rare quality in any species. Thank you, your majesty." The king looked at Daniel with an expression he could not read. "We will speak again, Daniel Carter. Of that, I am certain." Daniel returned to his room as the sun rose. He did not sleep. He could not stop thinking about the king's words, about the strange connection he felt in that garden. He did not know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. Daniel Carter was a simple man with a simple job. He worked in a small office in New York City, filing papers for the United Nations Extraterrestrial Affairs Division. His work was boring. He read documents about alien cultures, translated simple messages, and made sure everything was organized properly. He had never met an alien in person. He had never even left Earth. He was 32 years old, lived alone in a small apartment, and spent most of his free time reading books about space. He dreamed of visiting other planets, but he knew that was not possible for someone like him. Those adventures were for important people, not paper pushers like Daniel. One Tuesday morning, everything changed. Daniel arrived at his office like any other day. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat at his desk, and started going through his mail. Most of it was routine stuff. Reports, memos, boring things that made his eyes tired. But then he found something strange. It was an envelope unlike anything he had ever seen. The material felt like glass but bent like paper. It glowed softly with a pale blue light. His name was written on it in golden letters that seemed to float above the surface. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation. The words were written in both English and a flowing alien script. It said that Daniel Carter of Earth was formally invited to attend the royal wedding of Crown Prince Kalen Vathari of the Volanthi Empire. The ceremony would take place on their homeworld, Varith Prime. A transport would arrive for him in 3 days. Daniel read the invitation 5 times. He was sure there was a mistake. Why would anyone invite him to an alien royal wedding? He was nobody. He took the invitation to his supervisor, Patricia Morgan. She was a busy woman with gray hair and glasses that always sat crooked on her nose. When she saw the invitation, her face went white. "This cannot be right," she said, grabbing the document from his hands. The Volanthi only invited one person from Earth, and it was supposed to be Ambassador Collins. "How did your name end up on this?" Daniel had no answer. He was just as confused as she was. Patricia made phone calls. She sent messages. She talked to important people in offices far above their floor. But it was no use. The Volanthi invitation system was very specific. The invitation was linked to Daniel's biological signature somehow. It could not be transferred to anyone else. If Earth wanted a representative at the wedding, it had to be Daniel Carter. "This is a disaster," Patricia muttered, pacing back and forth in her office. "You have never been off-planet. You have never spoken to an alien. You do not know anything about Volanthi culture." "I know some things," Daniel said weakly. "I have read the files." Reading files is not the same as living it. Patricia stopped pacing and looked at him. There was worry in her eyes, but also something else. Maybe it was hope. "But we have no choice. You are going to represent all of humanity at one of the biggest events in the galaxy." The next 3 days were the most stressful of Daniel's life. He was given crash courses in Volanthi customs, language basics, and diplomatic behavior. Experts talked at him for hours until his head hurt. They gave him a fancy suit that was supposed to look formal, but made him feel like a child dressed up for a school picture. When the Volanthi transport ship arrived, Daniel stood on the landing platform with Patricia beside him. The ship was beautiful. It was shaped like a curved blade, all silver and blue, with lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Just remember 3 things," Patricia told him. "Do not touch anything important. Do not offend anyone. And for the love of everything, do not start a war." "I will try my best," Daniel said. He walked up the ramp and into the ship. The inside was even more beautiful than the outside. The walls seemed to be made of living light. Soft music played from somewhere he could not see. A Volanthi crew member greeted him with a bow. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that changed colors like a soap bubble. Its eyes were large and golden. "Welcome, Daniel Carter of Earth," the Volanthi said. Its voice was musical and strange. "Please follow me to your quarters. We will depart shortly." Daniel followed the alien through winding corridors. His room was small but comfortable. There was a bed that looked like a cloud, a window that showed the stars outside, and strange plants that glowed in soft colors. When the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, Daniel felt nothing. One moment, Earth was outside his window. The next moment, there was only the swirling colors of hyperspace. He was really doing this. He was really going to an alien wedding. The journey took 2 days. Daniel spent most of that time studying his notes and trying not to panic. He talked to the ship's crew a few times, but they were polite and distant. They answered his questions but did not volunteer any extra information. When they finally arrived at Varith Prime, Daniel pressed his face against the window like a child. The planet was beautiful beyond words. It had 3 moons that hung in a purple sky. The surface was covered with silver towers that reached toward the clouds. Gardens floated in the air, held up by technology Daniel could not understand. Rivers of light flowed through the cities, carrying boats that moved without oars or engines. "This is real," Daniel whispered to himself. This is actually real. The ship landed at the royal palace, a structure so large it made every building on Earth look small. Thousands of aliens from hundreds of different species were arriving at the same time. Daniel saw creatures with wings, creatures with tentacles, creatures made of living crystal. He saw robots and giants and beings that looked like walking fire. And there he was, one human in a borrowed suit, trying not to trip over his own feet. A Volante official met him at the bottom of the ramp. "Daniel Carter of Earth," the official said, reading from a floating tablet. "You have been assigned quarters in the outer wing. A guide will show you the way. The first ceremony begins tomorrow at sunrise." Daniel nodded and followed his guide through the palace. His room was simple compared to what he had seen, but it was still nicer than anywhere he had ever stayed. There was a balcony that looked out over the alien city. That night, Daniel stood on that balcony and watched the 3 moons rise. He thought about how strange life could be. 1 week ago, he was a nobody filing papers. Now he was standing on another world, about to attend a royal wedding. He did not know it yet, but his life was about to get much stranger. Because somewhere in the palace, a king had already noticed his arrival. And that king had plans that would change everything. The next morning, the palace was filled with whispers. Daniel noticed it as soon as he stepped out of his room. Aliens of every species stopped talking when he walked by. They stared at him with expressions he could not read. Something had happened, and he was clearly at the center of it. Sareth found him in the breakfast hall. The young Volante's skin was shifting through colors Daniel had never seen before. Bright oranges and deep reds mixed together. "You need to come with me," Sareth said. His voice was shaking. "Now, what is happening?" Daniel asked, but Sareth was already pulling him toward a private room. Inside, Sareth closed the door and turned to face Daniel. "The king made an announcement this morning. He has invoked an ancient rite called the selection of the royal consort." Daniel stared at him blankly. "I do not understand." Under Volante law, the monarch can choose a companion from any species present at a royal ceremony. It is an old tradition, very old. It has not been used in over 2,000 years. Sareth took a deep breath. "The king has chosen you, Daniel Carter." For a long moment, Daniel could not speak. The words made no sense. He was a paper pusher from Earth. He was nobody. Kings did not choose people like him for anything. "This has to be a mistake," he finally said. "The king does not make mistakes." Sarath's voice was firm, despite his obvious nervousness. "If he has chosen you, there must be a reason." Daniel sat down heavily on a nearby chair. His mind was spinning. He thought about his conversation with the king in the garden. It had been strange, yes, but nothing about it suggested something like this. "What does being a royal consort mean?" he asked. "It means you would stand beside the king as his chosen partner. Not a servant, not a subject, but an equal. You would help guide the empire, attend councils, represent the crown." Sareth paused. "It is the second highest position in the entire Volante Empire. This is insane." "Perhaps, but it is also real." The selection was not immediate. Daniel learned that he would have to prove himself through a series of trials. These trials were ancient traditions designed to test whether a candidate was worthy of standing beside the king. They were meant for Volante, not humans. The tasks would be nearly impossible for someone like Daniel. The first trial was announced the next day. It was called the Trial of Stillness. Candidates had to stand motionless in the palace courtyard from sunrise to sunset. Volante could enter a deep meditative state that made this easy. Humans could not. Daniel stood in the courtyard as the sun rose. He was the only candidate. No one else had been chosen, and no one was willing to challenge the king's selection. He was alone in a vast stone circle, with thousands of eyes watching from every direction. The first hour was easy. Daniel stood still and watched the alien sun climb higher. The light was golden and warm, different from Earth's sun, but not unpleasant. The second hour was harder. His legs began to ache. His back hurt from standing straight. He wanted to shift his weight, to move his arms, to do anything except stand still. By the fourth hour, Daniel was in pain. His muscles burned. Sweat ran down his face. The sun beat down on him without mercy. He could feel his body begging him to stop, to sit down, to give up. But he did not give up. Daniel thought about Earth. He thought about his parents, who had worked hard jobs so he could go to school. He thought about his teachers, who had believed in him when he did not believe in himself. He thought about every person who had ever told him he was not good enough, and he refused to prove them right. The fifth hour passed. The sixth. The seventh. Daniel's vision blurred. His legs shook. He could barely feel his feet. The world became nothing but pain and heat and the burning desire to fall down. But he stayed standing. By the ninth hour, Daniel could not think anymore. He was running on something deeper than thought, something primal and stubborn. His body was failing, but his will refused to break. Then at last, his legs gave out. He collapsed to the ground as the sun touched the horizon. Guards rushed forward to catch him before he hit the stone. When Daniel woke up, he was in a medical chamber. Healers moved around him, their hands glowing with strange energy. His body hurt everywhere, but he was alive. "You failed the trial," a voice said. Daniel turned his head and saw the king sitting beside his bed. Velith looked at him with an expression that was almost soft. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," Daniel said. His voice was rough and weak. "Do not be sorry. You lasted longer than any non-Volanthi in recorded history." The king leaned forward slightly. "The previous record was 4 hours. You stood for 9. Daniel blinked. "But I did not complete the trial. The trial measures character, not completion. You did not give up. You pushed your fragile human body beyond its limits rather than surrender." The king paused. "Why?" Daniel thought about the question. His brain was still foggy, but he knew the answer. "Because I said I would do it. Where I come from, your word means something. If you make a promise, you keep it, even when it hurts." The king was silent for a long moment. His golden eyes studied Daniel with an intensity that made Daniel feel exposed, like all his secrets were visible. "Your species interests me more with each passing day," Velith finally said. "You have passed the first trial, Daniel Carter. Not because you completed it, but because you showed the heart that my consort must have. There are more trials? 2 more. But they will not be tests of physical endurance." The king stood and looked down at Daniel. "Rest now. Recover your strength. You will need it for what comes next." Daniel closed his eyes as the king left. His body was broken, but something inside him felt stronger than ever. He had proven something today, not just to the Volanthi, but to himself. He could do this. He did not know how or why, but he could do this. And somewhere in the palace, watching through hidden cameras, Crown Prince Kalen burned with jealous rage. His father had lost his mind. A human as royal consort was an insult to everything the empire stood for. The prince would not allow it to happen. Whatever it took, he would stop Daniel Carter. The days after the first trial were difficult. Daniel's body healed slowly, even with Volanthi medicine helping. He spent most of his time resting in his room, trying to rebuild his strength for whatever came next. Sareth visited him every day, bringing news from the palace. The young Volanthi had become Daniel's only friend in this strange place. "The noble houses are not happy," Sareth reported one afternoon. "They say the king has lost his mind. They say a human should never be considered for such an important position." "They might be right," Daniel said. He was sitting up in bed, feeling stronger but still weak. "I am not qualified for this," I do not know anything about running an empire. The king does not need someone to run the empire. He needs someone to stand beside him. Someone honest. Someone who sees the world differently. Sarah sat down in a nearby chair. The Volanthi are old, Daniel. Our ways have not changed in thousands of years. Perhaps that is why the king is interested in you. Humans are new. Humans change everything they touch. Daniel thought about that. It made a strange kind of sense. The second trial came 3 days later. It was called the Trial of Words. Daniel was brought before a panel of Volanthi scholars, the wisest beings in the empire. They asked him questions about everything, from philosophy to science to art. It was like the hardest exam he had ever taken. But with no preparation and no books to study, Daniel answered as best he could. He did not pretend to know things he did not know. When the scholars asked about quantum physics, he admitted he barely understood the basics. When they asked about ancient Volanthi history, he confessed he had only learned what was in his briefing documents. But when they asked about humanity, Daniel spoke with confidence. He told them about human art, from cave paintings to digital movies. He told them about human music, from drums made of animal skin to symphony orchestras. He told them about human stories, the myths and legends that had been passed down for thousands of years. Your species has existed for barely a heartbeat compared to ours, one scholar said. Yet you have created so much. Why? Daniel considered the question carefully. Because we know we do not have much time. Humans live short lives. We are born, we grow old, and we die, all in what might seem like days to you. So we create with urgency. We build and paint and sing because we know that tomorrow might never come. The scholars looked at each other. Something passed between them that Daniel could not read. You have passed the second trial, the head scholar announced. Not because of your knowledge, but because of your wisdom in knowing what you do not know, and your passion for what you do. Daniel let out a breath he did not know he was holding. 2 trials down, 1 to go. But before the third trial could happen, danger came from an unexpected direction. It was the night of the Crown Prince's pre-wedding feast. Daniel was required to attend, despite Kellen's obvious hatred for him. The prince had cornered Daniel twice already, warning him to leave before something bad happened. Daniel had refused both times. The feast was held in a grand hall decorated with flowers that glowed like fire. Hundreds of guests filled the room, eating and drinking and celebrating. Daniel sat at a table near the back, trying to stay out of trouble. A servant brought him a drink, a cup of glowing purple liquid. Daniel thanked the servant and raised the cup to his lips. The taste was strange, bitter and sweet at the same time. Daniel swallowed and felt a burning sensation in his throat. Suddenly, his stomach clenched. His vision blurred. He dropped the cup and gripped the edge of the table. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Daniel tried to stand but fell from his chair instead. His body was shaking, his muscles twitching without control. He heard screams around him, voices shouting in languages he did not understand. Then everything went dark. When Daniel woke up, he was in the medical chamber again. The king was there, along with Sareth and several guards. The king's expression was cold and hard, his scales flickering with angry red. You were poisoned, Velas said. His voice was calm, but there was thunder beneath it. A toxin called Velethkai. It is lethal to Volanthi. 1 drop can kill in seconds. Daniel touched his throat, remembering the burning sensation. But I am not dead. No, you are not. The king's eyes narrowed. It seems human biology is different from ours. The poison made you sick, but it did not kill you. Our healers say it was nothing more than a bad reaction, similar to what you might call food poisoning. Who did this? Daniel asked. We are investigating, but I have suspicions. The king glanced toward the door, and Daniel understood. The Crown Prince, Kalen had warned him something bad would happen. Over the next 2 days, the investigation moved quickly. The servant who had brought Daniel the drink was found dead, killed to prevent him from talking. But the guards traced the poison back to a storage room used by several noble houses. Under pressure from the king, 3 minor nobles confessed to their part in the plot. They had been working together. Nobles who believed a human consort would destroy the empire. They had planned to kill Daniel and blame it on an accident. They had not expected him to survive. The king's justice was swift and terrible. The conspirators were stripped of their titles, their lands taken, their families shamed. They were exiled to the outer territories of the empire, sentenced to live on frozen moons at the edge of known space. "Let this be a warning," Velith announced to the gathered nobles. "Daniel Carter is under my protection. Anyone who moves against him moves against the crown." Daniel watched the announcement from his bed in the medical chamber. He felt strange, knowing that people had tried to kill him. On Earth, he had never been important enough for anyone to hate. Now he was important enough to murder. Sarah sat beside him, his color shifting to worried blues. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Daniel said slowly. "It has not really sunk in yet. You survived what should have killed you. The whole empire is talking about it. They say humans are harder to kill than anyone thought." Daniel laughed weakly. "We are stubborn. It is one of our few talents." The king came to visit later that evening. He sat in the same chair he had used before, studying Daniel with those golden eyes. "You could have died," Velith said. "You came here as a simple guest, and now powerful people want you dead. Do you still wish to continue?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about Earth, about his small apartment, and his boring job. He thought about Patricia Morgan telling him not to start a war. He thought about everything he had seen and done since arriving on Varith Prime. "Yes," he said. "I still wish to continue. Why? Because running away would prove them right. They think humans are weak. They think we do not belong here. If I leave now, I am saying they were correct." Daniel met the king's eyes. "I am not going to let people who tried to kill me decide what I can and cannot do." The king smiled, that beautiful and terrifying smile that Daniel was beginning to understand. "Good. Then rest well, Daniel Carter. The final trial awaits." The final trial was held on the 7th day of the wedding ceremony. It was called the Trial of Purpose, and it was the most important test of all. Daniel would stand before the Council of Elders, the ancient governing body of the Volanthi Empire, and answer one question. If his answer was worthy, he would become the royal consort. If not, everything would be over. Daniel spent the night before the trial unable to sleep. He stood on his balcony, watching the 3 moons move across the purple sky. In a few hours, his entire future would be decided. The thought was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Sareth came to help him prepare at dawn. The young Volanthi brought robes made of woven starlight, fabric that shimmered and changed color with every movement. Daniel put them on and looked at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. "You look like someone important," Sareth said. "I do not feel like someone important." "That is probably why you are important." Sareth smiled in the Volanthi way, a slight tilting of the head. The truly powerful never feel powerful. They just do what needs to be done. The Council of Elders met in a chamber deep within the palace. It was a circular room with no windows, lit by floating crystals that cast soft white light. 12 elders sat in a ring, their ancient scales dull with age, but their eyes sharp with wisdom. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed thousands of years of history. Daniel walked to the center of the ring and bowed. He could feel their eyes on him, weighing and measuring. Daniel Carter of Earth, the eldest of the council, spoke. Her voice was thin but strong, like wind through crystal. "You have come far. You have survived trials that should have broken you. You have endured pain that should have killed you. Now you face the final test. I am ready, Daniel said, and he meant it. The question is simple. Answer it truthfully, and you will have proven yourself worthy. The elder leaned forward. What can humanity offer to the Volanti Empire? What do your people bring that we do not already have? Daniel had expected this question. He had thought about it for days, turning it over in his mind. The council probably expected him to talk about technology, about weapons, about resources. They expected him to sell his species like a merchant selling goods. But Daniel chose a different path. We offer perspective, he said. His voice was clear and steady. Humanity is young. We have existed for a tiny fraction of the time your empire has stood. We have made more mistakes in our short history than most species make in 1,000,000 years. We have fought wars over stupid things. We have hurt each other for no reason. We have come close to destroying ourselves more times than we can count. The elders watched him silently. Daniel continued, but we have also learned from our mistakes. We know what it feels like to stand at the edge of destruction and pull ourselves back. We know that progress is not always forward, that greatness does not mean perfection. We know that the measure of a civilization is not its age or its power, but its ability to grow and change. He looked around at the ancient faces watching him. The Volanti Empire is old. Your ways have been set for thousands of years. Maybe that is good. Maybe stability is what keeps you strong. But sometimes old things need new eyes to see them clearly. Sometimes you need someone who can ask the questions everyone else has forgotten to ask. Daniel took a deep breath. That is what humanity offers. We are fresh eyes. We are new voices. We are the chaos that makes order possible. We do not have your wisdom or your technology or your long history, but we have something else. We have the courage to look at the universe and say, I do not understand this yet, but I will learn. The chamber fell silent. The elders looked at each other, their expressions unreadable. Daniel stood in the center of the ring and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. After what felt like hours, the eldest spoke again. We will deliberate. You may leave. Daniel bowed and walked out of the chamber. Sareth was waiting for him in the hallway. How did it go? Sareth asked. I do not know, Daniel admitted. I said what I believed. Whether it was enough, I cannot tell. They waited together for 3 hours. Daniel paced back and forth while Sareth tried to keep him calm. Finally, a guard came to summon them back to the chamber. The elders were standing now, arranged in a single line. The eldest held a crown made of living crystal, glowing with soft blue light. Daniel Carter of Earth, she announced. The council has reached a decision. Your answer showed wisdom beyond your years and honesty beyond your station. You understand what many beings never learn, that true strength comes not from knowing everything, but from being willing to learn. She stepped forward and placed the crown on Daniel's head. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless. By the authority of this council and the will of King Vilathalari, you are hereby declared worthy. You are now the royal consort of the Volanti Empire. The words echoed through the chamber. Daniel felt the crown on his head and could not quite believe it was real. The consort ceremony was held that afternoon, combined with the final day of the prince's wedding. The great hall was packed with delegates from across the galaxy. Daniel walked down the central aisle in his robes of starlight, the crystal crown glowing on his head. Thousands of eyes watched him, some curious, some hostile, some awed. King Valeth waited for him at the throne. The king's scales shimmered with royal colors, and his golden eyes were warm with something that might have been pride. Daniel climbed the steps and stood beside the king. A priest spoke ancient words in the Volanti language, words that bound Daniel to the throne and the empire. When the ceremony was complete, the king placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "This is not the end," Velith said quietly, so only Daniel could hear. "It is the beginning. Your presence here will change things. Some changes will be good. Some will be difficult. Are you ready?" Daniel looked out at the gathered crowd. He saw Sereth near the front, his colors bright with happiness. He saw Crown Prince Kalen standing stiff and angry with his new bride. He saw delegates from 100 worlds, species he had never imagined, all watching a human take his place beside an alien king. And somewhere in the back, he saw a group of people in human clothing. Earth diplomats, newly arrived, staring in absolute shock at what they were witnessing. Daniel almost smiled. "I am ready," he said. Thought Patricia Morgan had told him not to start a war. He had done better than that. He had become part of the peace. The ceremony ended with cheers that shook the walls. Music played. Dancing began. The celebration would last for hours, but Daniel barely noticed. He stood beside the king and thought about everything that had brought him here. A clerical error. A borrowed suit. A conversation in a garden. Life was strange. Life was wonderful. Life was full of surprises that no one could predict. Daniel Carter, once a nobody from Earth, now stood at the center of an alien empire. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if he would succeed or fail. But he knew one thing for certain. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage. They had sent a paper pusher to a wedding, and somehow, against all odds, he had become a king's consort. Nothing would ever be the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly how it was supposed to be.